got that nickname, Rock of the Marne, because they were able to hold the Marne River crossings. The Germans were trying to punch through that final offensive. Those divisions that had been on the eastern front against the Russians are now on the western front trying to punch through. And in many ways, the Americans got there just in time. That was that river crossing on the Marne. The effect on the new American troops, though, was incredible. This was an account that an American officer in 1st Division wrote. One man in panic stampeded and knocked down 2 others adjusting their masks. He rushed down the trench screaming and made no attempt to put on his respirator. He died shortly after reaching the dressing station. Another man threw himself in the bottom of the trench and began to scream. 2 others trying to adjust his respirator had their own pulled off and were gassed. He was finally carried out of the area but died not long after. Another private couldn't find his respirator and became panic-stricken. When it was found and finally adjusted, he claimed it was broken and changed into his French mask, breathing in gas while changing. On the way to the dressing station, he repeatedly pulled the French mask away from his face and breathed the gas-laden air, died shortly after reaching the station. So you get the impression this is a perfect weapon. This doesn't just do the damage of a gunshot wound. This does damage all the way through the ranks. Against the 77th Division, that's the one that the Lost Battalion was in the Meuse-Argonne, they had just two German attacks, 2 different days, over 1,000 gas casualties. 30% of them had burns, 60% had eye complications, and 10% had lung complications. So you can see just protecting against the lung exposure with the respirator, especially against mustard gas, is only partial. The net effect, in several studies, those gas shells, every gas shell caused 2 to 4 casualties. That's back to what you're talking about, how cost effective it was. A casualty from the high explosive shells, the ratio was 44 of those high explosive shells to inflict 1 casualty. And so every gas shell was creating 2 to 4. Every one. Gas replaced high explosive as the chief artillery weapon. And the impact, well, some of the folks, as if you could understand just in that account, was just panic and anxiety. That's good enough to make somebody ineffective. You don't have to shoot them. Gas hospitals had to be near the clean water supply because you had to try to get it off. Once it got on there, you had to try to get it off. Gas was on and in all the wounded. So even if they're wounded with high explosive or gunshot wounds, they're coming in on litters contaminated with gas. The clothes are permeated with the mustard gas and all the other substances. Gas was on the clothes, the hair, the skin, the equipment. They had to remove the residuation. They used bicarbonate of soda to try to neutralize it and get it off when they were back. And they had other alkalinizing agents that would neutralize the gas. If they ate it, got on the food and they ate the stuff, you had to treat the gastrointestinal tract then, and that meant castor oil, olive oil. It's a mess. This is an amazing weapon. The psychological effects could be profound. But so what did they do to deal with it? Well, one of the things, the American way, retaliate. And by the end of the war, the Americans were awfully good using gas weapons too. What was the best counter to this hellish gas war? Retaliation. The English gas expert Victor Lefebvre stated the absolute necessity of using gas to reply to the many German attacks. If we were not able to retaliate in kind, none but the gravest consequences would have resulted with regard to morale. And the Americans were hot to retaliate. After the severe German gas attack in August, the 57th Field Artillery Brigade, 32nd Division, supporting that 77th Division, and prior to their departure, they wanted to give the Boche a parting shower of gas, but the gas shells were a kilometer away, and there was no conveyance to get them to the battery. So all the men, without exception, carried shells on their backs to the battery. General Bullard of the 1st Division remarked that when his cannoneers were at last issued gas shells in July 1918, their morale soared and the issue caused a great jubilee.
So what companies did make the gas? I mean, were they all over?
And some of them were famous. Companies like DuPont, Dow Chemical, some of the folks that were the predecessors of those companies were the ones making it. And we had an amazing industrial base, so they could truly, by the end of the war, Americans were fighting fire with fire.
So strategically they could get, it was pretty accessible.
Not to begin with.
Oh.
It's frustrating, and that's part of the issue now that we've come to deal with is you can't wait and get ready as you go. If you don't have it ready, you won't have it there. And so to begin with, we could not retaliate. We didn't have the supplies of the gas weapons to use. But as the war went on, they did. And the American development actually was a product called Lewisite. That was an arsenic-based chemical agent similar to mustard, but it was far more effective because rather than just burning, it would cause death. So it was a vesicant that was a killing vesicant. And it was just being deployed at the end of the war. It would have been used in the offensives in 1919 if the war had still been going on. We had gas and flame regiments. They had those Livens projectors and the Stokes mortars. The mortar was a perfect weapon for firing a gas shell. The protection against the gas, how do you defend against it? Talk about the gas mask and the stuff here. The gas mask was an individual protection, and like the cootie, as so many of them talked about, they always had the gas mask on. So they were all had the lice infestation from the trenches and from the bunkers and being around so much of it. They also had the gas mask they kept with them at all times. They used it as an ID, and all of these up here as examples, their names are on. They want to keep up with their mask. You've got to have yours. You've got to be able to get to it. They were almost superstitiously attached to the gas mask. So after fighting and eating and sleeping with them all that time, a bunch of them got brought home as souvenirs. I mean, if you think about it, after you've gone through that, would you really want something like that around? But they did. It was just the Americans and the souvenirs. Inscriptions on the mask carriers are becoming more numerous every day. Some are embroidered with khaki thread, some just marked with pen or pencil. I need thee every hour, always in the way, People's Gas and Light and Coke Company, Tango Lizard, Old Man of the Sea. Probably the most descriptive name inscribed on a gas mask is War God. I'm wedded to it. It lives here. It goes nowhere else. How did they get the word out? They were only as good as you had them on. Because if they're in the bunker, if they're in the trench, if it's no longer right there on you, you're not going to have the protection when someone starts the alarm. But the alarm itself was interesting. That's what I brought this. This is a World War I gas alarm. These were the same thing as battle rattles that were used on ships as alarms in the Revolutionary War era. And so anybody that would be asleep, anyone who could get it, that's the alarm put on the mask. But here again, and that's what's amazing, some of these photographs show too, the dedication, but also the sense of humor that the Americans developed about dealing with this. This was one captain's account that came out of the 33rd Division. Foret de la Reine, August 30th, 1918. There is a tremendous banging on a dishpan. Someone howls gas. Someone blows a whistle. You know at once that it's merely a drill call, else the man who banged the dishpan would not have lived long enough to blow the whistle. Imagine a cold in the head. I love this account about what it felt like to have one of these gas masks on. Imagine a cold in the head, a dentist's chair in the days of the rubber dam, a gag, an inability to swallow, a nose filled with hot cinders, a hat 4 sizes too small, all intensified to the nth power of the mixing. You can realize the wild freedom of the gas mask. Useful, ah yes. During the first 6 hours of wear, it saves the wearer's life. During the next 6 hours, it makes him realize life's futility. A man who had never known the desirability of scientific safety might object to being gassed. Not so the man who knows.